You ever hear a story that makes you stop and just feel something? A police team thought they were answering a routine call, just another search, another night. But when their German shepherd, Max, started barking at an empty crib, everything changed. What they found under those floorboards would remind the world what loyalty really means. This isn't just a story about a K9 hero. It's about love. The kind that doesn't speak, but acts. The kind that risks everything, because it knows no other way. I've spent years studying stories like this. Real moments between humans and dogs that show us what devotion looks like when words fall short. And today, I want to share one that'll stay with you long after the video ends. Because if you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt that unspoken bond, you already know what this story is about. Stay with me till the end. You're going to see why German Shepherds aren't just protectors. They're proof that love, in its purest form, sometimes walks on four legs. The morning fog rolled over the countryside like a living thing, soft, gray, and endless. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath boots and the low hum of police radios. Detective Laura Bennett pulled her collar up against the chill, her breath a faint mist that vanished into the pale air. The world felt muted, as if sound itself was holding its breath. They'd been called to check an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town, one of those places that looked forgotten by time. Reports said it might be a safe house for human trafficking, but Laura had heard that before. 90% of the time, these calls were dead ends. Empty rooms, traces of squatters, nothing more. Routine, predictable. The kind of work that made you numb if you stayed too long in the job. Routine search, Sergeant Morales muttered as he tightened his vest. Probably just raccoons again. Laura smirked faintly. Yeah? You volunteering to catch them this time? The team chuckled, the sound dissolving into the fog. It was a small relief. Humor was their only armor against the weight of what they usually found. Behind them, the black K9 SUV door opened with a quiet click. A large German shepherd stepped out. Max. His coat glistened with morning dew, silver strands mingling with deep tan and black fur. Age had softened his gait, but his eyes burned with that steady, unshakable focus that had earned him a decade of service. "Morning, old boy," Laura said softly, crouching to clip on his harness. The patch on it read, Police K9, Unit 27. Max's ears flicked forward at her voice. He leaned gently against her hand, an instinctive gesture of trust. Laura smiled, a small, private smile only he could draw from her. There was something unspoken between them, forged over years of chaos and quiet. He had been there through everything, every case, every loss. Even the nights she came home too tired to speak. She straightened and looked toward the house ahead. The structure loomed out of the fog like a ghost, its roof sagging, windows boarded, the paint long peeled away. And yet, it stood there defiantly, a relic of something that once had life. "Looks peaceful enough," Officer Carter said, his voice uneasy. "Yeah," Laura murmured. "That's what worries me." They approached carefully, flashlights cutting through the haze. The trees pressed close, their skeletal branches clawing at the mist. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called, a sound sharp enough to raise goosebumps. Max walked ahead, paws silent, nose twitching, every step deliberate, every breath calculated. The team stopped at the gate, its hinges rusted, half buried in overgrown weeds. Laura held up a hand for silence. The radio static softened. For a moment, it felt like the entire forest was listening. Then, faintly, There it was. A sound drifting from inside the house, barely audible. A soft, haunting lullaby. The kind of melody that mothers once hummed to their babies. Gentle, rhythmic, almost tender. But in that place, under that fog, it felt wrong. Morales frowned. You hear that? Yeah, Laura whispered. Music box, maybe. Or, she didn't finish the thought. The idea of someone playing that tune in a house like this didn't sit right. Max's ears perked sharply. He tilted his head, nostrils flaring, then gave a low growl that rumbled deep in his chest. Easy, Max, Laura murmured, resting a hand on his back. But he didn't relax. His body was tense, muscles coiled. The lullaby stopped, just like that. The silence that followed was worse. Not the calm kind, the suffocating kind, thick with things unseen. Morales gave the signal. Let's move in. Standard sweep. Laura, you and Max take point. They advanced through the yard, boots sinking into soft earth. The front door was cracked open, just enough to creak in the wind. It swung slowly, back and forth, as if inviting them in. Laura's flashlight beam caught dust motes swirling in the doorway. She pushed the door gently, its hinges moaning in protest. The interior was dim, the air stale and cold. She hesitated, glancing down at Max. You ready, partner? The dog's eyes locked with hers. Steady. Certain. Yeah, she whispered. Me too. They stepped inside. The floorboards groaned beneath their weight. Every sound magnified, breathing, footsteps, even the slow tick of something unseen. The team spread out, flashlights sweeping over old furniture draped in sheets, children's toys scattered across the floor, a broken tricycle near the wall. This place gives me the creeps, Carter muttered. Laura ignored him. She moved carefully, scanning the corners, checking for movement. The fog outside pressed against the windows, blurring the world beyond. Then she saw it. On the mantel, half buried under dust. A torn photograph. She brushed it gently with her glove. A family of 3 smiled back. A man, a woman, and a baby in their arms. The edges were burned. The father's face half missing. Her chest tightened. Who were they? What happened here? Behind her, Max sniffed the floor, nose brushing across old footprints. He paused, ears twitching, then turned sharply toward the staircase. Laura, Morales called softly. She raised a hand for silence. Max was moving again, slow but determined, tail stiff, body alert. Something's got his attention, she said. The stairs creaked under her boots as she followed. Each step groaned like a warning. The second floor was darker, the air colder. The smell of mildew mixed with something faintly sweet, dust and decay. Max reached the landing, head low, nostrils flaring. He took 2 steps forward, then froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. His tail dropped. The fur along his spine rose in sharp ridges. Max? Laura whispered. He didn't move, his eyes fixed on a doorway ahead, one that led to a small room at the end of the hall. Laura felt her pulse quicken. She motioned for backup, the others fanning out behind her. They approached slowly, flashlights steady. Inside the room, the wallpaper had peeled away in long strips. Dust floated in lazy patterns through the air. In the center stood an old wooden crib, its paint chipped, its mobile dangling crookedly from above. Empty. Completely empty. But Max didn't think so. He stepped forward, hackles high, and let out a sudden, piercing bark. The sound shattered the stillness. 1, 2, 3 barks. Sharp, urgent, desperate. Everyone froze. Carter blinked. There's nothing there. Laura didn't answer. She was staring at Max, watching the way his body trembled, the intensity in his eyes. He wasn't barking out of aggression. He was warning them. A chill ran down her spine. Something was wrong here. The fog outside pressed harder against the window panes, making the glass moan. Somewhere deep in the house, the lullaby started again. Soft, faint, like a ghost whispering through the walls. Laura's breath hitched. Max growled low, his gaze never leaving the crib. Whatever he sensed, it was real. And it was only the beginning. The moment they crossed the threshold, the air changed. It was colder here, thicker somehow, heavy with the weight of what had once been a home. Their flashlights sliced through the gloom, revealing specks of dust floating like tiny ghosts. Every corner seemed to breathe with the past, whispering stories long forgotten. Laura led the way, her gloved fingers brushing against the faded wallpaper as she moved. The pattern had once been cheerful, a field of tiny blue flowers, but now it peeled in jagged strips, curling away from the wall like old skin. Her boots crunched against broken glass. Somewhere deeper inside, a door creaked slowly back and forth, moved only by the whisper of wind. "Watch your step," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Officer Carter, a few feet behind her, let out a nervous chuckle. This place could star in a horror movie. "Quiet," Morales said sharply, scanning the hallway with his weapon ready. "Focus." Their lights swept across fragments of the past. A child's doll missing an arm. A small chair overturned. A rusted kettle still sitting on the stove, as if waiting for someone who never came back. On the counter, the outline of a photograph was visible. A clean square on a dusty surface, its frame long gone. The silence was eerie, but not empty. There was something under it, a pulse in the air that made Laura's skin prickle. She could almost hear breathing, the house itself exhaling after years of being forgotten. Behind her, Max padded silently, his claws making soft clicks against the warped wood. His head moved side to side, ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring as he took in every scent. Dust, decay, something faintly sweet, time potions, and something else. "Max doesn't like it here," Laura said quietly. Morales turned to her. "Dogs don't like empty houses." She didn't answer. She'd worked with Max long enough to know the difference between discomfort and alertness. This wasn't nerves. This was instinct. They turned a corner into what had once been the living room. The moonlight filtering through the cracks of boarded windows made everything shimmer faintly silver. Furniture lay toppled or covered in sheets, like bodies at rest. On the floor were faint footprints, small ones, barely visible under the dust. "Recent?" Carter asked, crouching down. "Hard to tell," Laura said, leaning in. The prints looked weeks old, maybe months, but something about them unsettled her. The shape wasn't right. Some were small, child-sized, and scattered in strange, hurried patterns. Max sniffed the air again, then gave a low growl that reverberated through the empty space. "Easy, boy," Laura whispered. He ignored her voice, moving toward a narrow hallway at the back. His tail stiffened, head low. "Looks like your partner found something," Morales said, gesturing for the others to follow. The hallway was narrow, walls marked with stains and handprints too small to belong to adults. Laura's flashlight caught something on the floor. A half-torn photograph, edges curled and yellowed. She picked it up carefully. A woman smiled back at her, a young mother holding a baby wrapped in a white blanket. The corner was ripped away, but faintly, in the missing space she could make out part of another figure. A man's arm, maybe. The photo looked like it had been torn in anger. Her throat tightened. She couldn't help but wonder what had happened to them. Morales peeked over her shoulder. Family photo. Maybe they used to live here before it got taken over. Maybe, Laura murmured. But her instincts told her this house hadn't been just abandoned. It had been emptied, too quickly, too violently. They moved toward the staircase, its banister thick with grime. The steps groaned under their weight, protesting each footfall. Max climbed ahead, his body tense. Every few steps he'd stop, ears flicking toward the sounds above, wood shifting, something faint tapping in the walls. By the time they reached the top, even Morales was breathing shallowly. The hallway stretched out before them. Long, narrow, lined with closed doors. Their lights cut through dust so thick it seemed alive. "Split?" Carter suggested. Laura shook her head. "No. Stay together." She trusted her gut. And her dog. Max sniffed along the floor, nose dragging close to the boards. He paused at the first door on the right, tail rigid, then moved on. The second door, he hesitated. The third, he stopped. He stared, unmoving, muscles quivering under his fur. "Something wrong?" Morales whispered. Laura raised a hand for silence. The others froze, listening. From somewhere ahead, a creak echoed, slow, rhythmic, like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards. Carter's flashlight trembled slightly. "You heard that, right?" Laura's jaw tightened. "Open the door." They pushed it gently. The hinges shrieked, metal grinding against metal, echoing down the hall. Inside, the smell hit them first. Stale, sour, the kind of scent that clings to fabric and memory. The room was small, with faded pink wallpaper peeling away in long strips. In the corner sat an old wooden crib, its paint chipped and splintered. A tiny mobile hung from above, rusted bells shaped like stars. It turned lazily in the draft, making a soft tinkling sound that shouldn't have been possible. No wind strong enough to move it. Laura's breath caught. The crib was empty. "Just an old nursery," Carter said quietly, trying to sound calm. But Max didn't see it that way. He took one step forward, then another, until he stood directly in front of the crib. His entire body was trembling, not from fear, but from some primal urgency. "Max?" Laura called softly. He didn't look at her. His nose touched the edge of the crib. Then suddenly, he barked. A single, sharp bark that shattered the silence. Then another, and another. The sound was deafening in the small room, each bark echoing off the walls, filling the space with raw energy. "Hey, easy," Morales said, stepping forward. "What's wrong with him?" Laura knew this wasn't normal. Max wasn't warning off a threat. He wasn't confused. He was trying to tell them something. "Hold him," she said firmly, crouching beside the crib. Her flashlight beam shook as she shone it across the empty mattress. Nothing but dust, a torn blanket, a single pacifier lying on its side. But the dog wouldn't stop. His tail was rigid, hackles raised, eyes locked on the spot beneath the crib. Laura's heart hammered in her chest. "Something's here," she whispered. Morales frowned. "There's nothing, Laura." Before he could finish, Max lunged forward, his claws scraping at the wooden floorboards beneath the crib. The sound was violent, desperate, wood splintering, nails snapping. His paws came away bloody, but he didn't stop. "Jesus, Max!" Carter yelled, trying to pull him back. "Let him," Laura ordered, her voice low but firm. For a moment, everyone just stared. The only sound was Max's heavy breathing and the relentless scraping of claws against wood. Then, silence. He stopped suddenly, panting, his head low. His eyes flicked up to Laura's, and that's when she felt it. A chill so deep it burned. Something in this room was wrong, terribly wrong. The lullaby from earlier began again, faint and broken, coming from somewhere behind the wall. Carter's flashlight flickered. Morales cursed under his breath. Max stood his ground, unmoving now, a low growl vibrating in his throat. Laura stepped closer to the crib, her voice barely a whisper. "What is it, boy?" He answered her with a final guttural bark, sharp, urgent, filled with warning. The sound tore through the house, echoing down the hallways like an omen, and in that moment, every officer in that room felt it, the first real shiver of dread. For a moment, no one moved. The sound of Max's barking still hung in the air, echoing through the old house like a memory that refused to die. The flashlight beams wavered, catching on the swirling dust, painting the scene in trembling gold and gray. Then, the silence broke. Carter gave a strained laugh. "Jesus, he's scaring the hell out of me. Probably just smelled a rat nest under there." "Or a squirrel," Morales added, forcing a chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. "You know how these old places are. Everything's rotting, full of critters." But Laura didn't laugh. She was still watching Max. The dog stood rigid before the crib, head low, eyes locked on the floorboards. His chest heaved with each breath, but there was something in his posture that made her stomach twist. Not aggression, not excitement, something deeper. He wasn't warning them. He was pleading. Laura's instincts, honed from years on the job, kicked in. She crouched beside him, her voice soft, the same tone she used when they were alone after long shifts. "Hey, partner. What are you trying to tell me?" Max turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting hers. There was desperation in his eyes, the kind that comes from knowing something terrible and being unable to speak it. He gave a low whine, then another. Carter exhaled loudly. "Laura, come on! The dog's just reacting to the smell. It's an old house. Probably mold or some dead animal under there." But Laura barely heard him. She pressed her palm against the floorboards where Max's nose had pointed. The wood was cold, colder than it should have been. "Morales," she said quietly, not looking up. "What's the temp outside right now?" He blinked. "What?" "Just check." He glanced at his watch. 43 degrees. Laura frowned. "Then why is it freezing right here?" Morales rubbed the back of his neck. "Come on, Laura. Don't start with that ghost story stuff." But even he didn't sound convinced. The others shifted uncomfortably. The air inside the nursery seemed to thicken, pressing against their lungs. The faint sound of that broken lullaby played again, so soft it was almost imagined. Laura's flashlight trembled in her hand. Max began pacing in a small circle, nose brushing the floor, tail stiff as a rod. Then suddenly he stopped again, and this time he growled. It was low and guttural, a sound that came from deep in his chest. Carter stepped back. "Okay, now he's just freaking me out." Laura rose to her feet. "Nobody move." Her voice was steady but quiet, the kind of tone that silences a room. She was staring at Max, watching his every breath. He had lowered himself now, body tight, eyes locked on the exact spot beneath the crib. "Laura," Morales said hesitantly, "we don't have anything solid here. If this is just the dog reacting to rodents, then I'll owe you a round of drinks," she said flatly. "Protocol says we clear if—" I said, "Wait." Max's growl deepened, echoing off the peeling walls. Then, in a sudden burst of motion, he lunged forward and began digging. The sound was raw and violent, claws tearing into wood, scraping and splintering. Timson 100 moms boom. Whoa, whoa, Max, easy! Carter moved to pull him back, but Laura grabbed his arm. Don't, she said sharply. Let him work. Morales stepped closer, flashlight shaking slightly in his grip. He's going to tear up the floor, Laura. I don't care, she snapped. Max kept going. The floorboards screamed under his claws. Splinters flew into the air. Blood began to stain the wood where his paws struck again and again. But he didn't stop. The others exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had seen him like this before. Not during raids, not during rescues. There was no aggression in him, no fear, just a furious, desperate need to reach whatever lay beneath. Jesus, Morales muttered. He's gonna hurt himself. Laura crouched beside him again, her heart pounding. She could feel the vibration through the floor, the rhythm of his digging, the sharp scent of blood and dust. Max, she whispered, what is it? What do you smell? The dog didn't look up. His breath came in ragged bursts, the fur along his spine slick with sweat and grime. His claws scraped against something solid, a hollow thunk that echoed beneath the boards. Laura's pulse spiked. Did you hear that? Carter frowned. It's just wood. Maybe a loose joist. She shook her head. No, that's something underneath. Laura, shut up. Her voice cracked, raw with emotion. Just listen. For a few seconds, no one breathed. The only sound was the wind pressing against the house, and Max's low panting as he stared at the spot he'd been digging. Laura pressed her ear close to the floor. At first, nothing. Then, faintly, she thought she heard it. A soft sound. A rhythm. It wasn't a creak or a shift in the wood. It was too delicate. Too human. It was breathing. Her eyes widened. She pulled back sharply, her throat tightening. Morales, she said hoarsely, get me a crowbar, now. The sergeant blinked. What? Just do it! He scrambled to his bag, muttering something under his breath. Carter ran a hand through his hair. You can't be serious. You really think... I don't think, Laura interrupted, her voice low but trembling. I know. She looked down at Max, who had stopped digging but was still shaking, his chest heaving. His paws bled freely now, crimson smearing the floor. Yet even in his exhaustion, he held her gaze, pleading, trusting her to understand. Laura reached out, resting her hand on his neck. Her voice softened. Good boy. You found something, didn't you? His tail thumped weakly once, then went still. Morales handed her the crowbar, his hand trembling slightly. If we're wrong about this, then I'll take the blame, Laura said. She wedged the metal between the splintered boards. The sound of wood cracking filled the air. Carter winced. We're going to catch hell for this. Better that than miss something. Max backed away slightly, sitting down beside her. Time 100 mums. His breathing was ragged, his eyes unblinking. Every muscle in his body was still taut, waiting. The boards groaned and gave way, revealing a dark, narrow gap beneath the floor. Dust poured out like smoke. A faint draft brushed against her face. Cold, wet, almost metallic. Laura leaned closer, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. For a split second, she thought she saw movement, but then, just as quickly, it was gone. She turned to Morales. There's something down there. Carter muttered, or nothing at all. Or someone, she said quietly. The air felt electric now, thick with tension. Max gave a soft whine, pawing weakly at the edge of the hole. Laura's mind raced. Every second she hesitated could cost her. Cost someone. A life. But protocol screamed in her head. No unauthorized destruction of property. No unconfirmed evidence, no further action. And yet, she looked at Max again. The old dog bleeding, trembling, eyes still fixed on that dark hole as if begging her to believe him. Her heart clenched. This was more than training. This was trust. She exhaled shakily. "All right," she whispered, mostly to herself. "We do this my way." Then louder, steadier. "Morales, Carter, we open it up, now." Carter hesitated. "Laura, do it!" The order snapped through the air. Max let out a single bark. Not frantic this time, but firm, approving, almost grateful. As they knelt to pry the boards apart, the lullaby outside began, again, faint and broken, and Laura couldn't shake the feeling that whatever they were about to uncover would change everything. The sound of the crowbar scraping against the wood was sharp and metallic, cutting through the heavy silence like a scream. Each strike sent a shiver up Laura's arms, her gloved hands gripping the handle tight. The boards were thick, stubborn, built decades ago when homes were made to outlast generations. But the old wood was no match for desperation. With every pull, flakes of dust rose into the air, swirling like pale ghosts. Beam of her flashlight. Morales worked beside her, sweat streaking his brow despite the chill. Carter hovered near the door, torn between duty and disbelief. Come on," Laura muttered, wedging the tool deeper. "There's something here. I can feel it." Max stood just behind her, his breathing labored, his paws still bleeding from where he'd clawed at the floor. His chest rose and fell fast, but his eyes never left the spot she was prying open. Each time the wood cracked, he flinched, as if he knew they were tearing into a secret meant to be found. Finally, the last plank gave way with a deep groan. A hollow space yawned beneath, a cavity lined with torn plastic and decaying insulation. A gust of cold, damp air rolled upward, the smell of earth, mold, and something else, faint, metallic. The flashlight beam wavered as Laura leaned closer, her pulse pounding in her ears. "Anything?" Morales asked, his voice low. She didn't answer. Her light swept across the narrow compartment, a rough space no bigger than a crawl hole. Old blankets, stiff with grime, lay folded over something. Her heart thudded. "There's something under the fabric." Morales crouched beside her. "Could just be—" "Help me," she said quickly. They both reached down, pulling at the filthy material. Dust puffed out in clouds. Beneath the first layer was another, thinner, softer. It looked almost like a swaddle, frayed at the edges. Laura's fingers froze mid-movement. The weight beneath her hands shifted slightly. "Wait." The air went still. For a long second, the only sound was the faint creak of the house. Then, a sound. Barely audible, weak. A soft, trembling cry. It was so faint that for a moment Laura thought she had imagined it. But Max's head jerked up instantly, ears pricked, eyes wide. A soft whine escaped his throat, the same sound he made when he recognized something precious. "Oh my God," Morales whispered, his voice breaking. Laura's flashlight shook in her hand. There's someone down there." She ripped the remaining fabric away, her gloves catching on torn threads. The beam of light fell across a small form, impossibly small. A baby, pale as moonlight, wrapped in a dirty blanket, her tiny chest fluttering with shallow breaths. "Jesus Christ," Carter breathed from behind them, his voice choked. Laura's world blurred for a moment. The edges of the room dissolved. All she could see was the fragile curve of the baby's cheek, the bluish tint of her lips, the trembling rise and fall of her body. "Call an ambulance!" she shouted, her voice sharp and breaking all at once. Now! Morales fumbled for his radio, his hands shaking. Dispatch, this is Unit 27. We need emergency medical. Infant found alive. Repeat, infant found alive. Laura reached down, carefully, her fingers trembling as she lifted the child from the dark hole. The blanket was damp and cold. The baby's skin was clammy, fragile, like holding smoke. It's okay. It's okay, sweetheart, Laura whispered, pulling the baby to her chest. Her own voice cracked on the words. You're safe now. You're safe. The baby let out another faint whimper, no louder than a breath. Laura's throat burned. She pulled the edge of her jacket around the tiny body, trying to share her warmth. The world around her faded. The team, the house, the protocol. All that existed now was this fragile spark of life in her arms. Morales crouched beside her, eyes wide with disbelief. How long do you think she's been? I don't know, Laura cut in. Long enough. Too long. Carter turned away, blinking hard, pretending to check the hallway. His voice was tight. I thought this was going to be another dead-end search. Laura didn't answer. She could barely breathe. She looked down at the baby, whose eyelids fluttered weakly. For a moment, she wasn't Detective Bennett, or a police officer following orders. She was just a woman, a heartbeat away from breaking. Max edged closer, his nose brushing against the edge of her jacket. He whimpered softly, a low, tender sound that made Laura's eyes sting. Yeah, she whispered, stroking his head with her free hand. You did good, partner. Her words quivered, half laugh, half sob. The baby stirred slightly, letting out a faint, fragile cry, the sound barely more than air. But it was enough. Enough to remind them she was alive. Morales wiped his face quickly, pretending it was sweat. I've seen a lot in this job, he said hoarsely. But this is something else. Laura nodded faintly. Her heart felt too big for her chest. We almost walked out. We almost left her here. Max leaned his head closer to the infant, breathing softly against the tiny hand that poked out from the blanket. The baby's fingers twitched, a faint, instinctive reach toward the warmth. Laura's breath hitched. Look, she whispered. The baby's hand opened and closed weakly, brushing against Max's fur. The dog froze, then made a small, guttural noise deep in his chest, part whine, part sigh. His tail gave one slow thump on the floor. Something in that small, trembling movement broke the dam inside the room. Carter turned away again, blinking hard. Morales muttered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer. And Laura. She pressed her forehead against the baby's, closing her eyes. You're safe now, she murmured again, voice trembling. You're safe because he didn't give up. Her arms tightened protectively around the infant, as though holding her could undo everything that had come before. Outside, the sirens wailed faintly in the distance, distant, but growing louder. The sound bled through the fog, carrying a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The room itself seemed to exhale, the weight of what had been hidden finally released. Laura stayed kneeling there, her knees numb, her heart aching in a way she hadn't felt in years. Max lay beside her, his head on her lap, eyes soft, as if exhausted by the emotion that hung in the air. The baby gave another faint cry, and Laura smiled through tears. That's it, she whispered. Stay with me. Keep fighting. The child's chest rose, fell, and rose again, slow but steady. Morales, she said softly, still cradling the baby. When they get here, tell them she's strong. Tell them she made it. He nodded, his voice breaking. Yeah, I will. The sirens grew closer, echoing through the trees outside. Flashing red lights began to bleed through the windows, scattering against the dust-filled air like stars in the mist. Laura looked down at the baby one last time. Her pale cheeks, her trembling breaths, her tiny fingers still gripping the blanket. Then the baby's eyelids fluttered open. Two fragile, glassy eyes blinked up at her, dazed and unfocused, but alive. Laura froze. A soft sob escaped her lips before she could stop it. "Hey there," she whispered. "You're a fighter, huh?" Max whined again, leaning closer until his nose brushed the baby's hand once more. For the first time since stepping into that house, Laura let herself cry. Silent, shaking tears spilled down her face, falling onto the child's blanket. In the midst of that ruined room surrounded by dust and broken things, life flickered in the dark. Red and blue lights tore through the fog, painting the old house in desperate color. The sound of sirens pulsed like a heartbeat, growing louder, faster, matching the rhythm of Laura's racing pulse. Paramedics stormed through the doorway, carrying stretchers and bags of equipment that clattered against the walls. "We've got an infant in respiratory distress," Laura shouted as they entered. "Found under the floor. Hypothermic, malnourished, possible oxygen deprivation." "Let's move," one of them barked, already kneeling beside her. The man's gloved hands worked quickly, checking the baby's pulse, opening his kit. The child's breathing was shallow, a flutter of air that seemed to vanish before it began. Laura held her breath as they wrapped the baby in a thermal blanket and fitted a tiny oxygen mask over her face. Max stood a few feet back, watching everything. His fur bristled, his body trembling with silent intensity. His nose twitched each time the baby whimpered. "Vitals faint but present," one medic said. "We need to transport now." They lifted the baby onto the stretcher. Laura followed instinctively, unable to let go. She felt like if she blinked, if she stepped back even for a second, that tiny spark of life might disappear. "Detective, we've got it from here," the paramedic said firmly. But Laura shook her head. "I'm going with her." "Ma'am, that's not—" "She's mine," Laura said softly, her voice breaking. "She's my case." Something in her tone, the rawness, the quiet plea, silenced the argument. The paramedic just nodded. "Then move. We're out of time." They raced, outside. The air hit Laura like a slap, cold, sharp, full of sirens and chaos. The fog had thickened again, wrapping around the ambulance lights in a crimson haze. Max followed close, his paws splashing through mud. When they reached the vehicle, Laura turned to him, kneeling for half a second. "Stay here, Max," she whispered, her hand brushing over his head. "You did your part." But Max didn't understand stay. He pressed forward until his nose touched the ambulance door. His reflection caught in the chrome, eyes wild, alert, desperate. "Let him ride," Morales said quietly. "He earned it." Laura's eyes met his, a silent thank you, before she climbed in. The doors slammed shut behind them, sealing out the fog, sealing in the storm. Inside, everything was noise and light. Machines beeped, gloves rustled, voices barked orders. The baby lay on the stretcher, wrapped so tightly she seemed weightless, just a wisp of warmth in a world of metal and sirens. Laura sat beside her, clutching the side rail with one hand, the other hovering near the baby's blanket, afraid to touch, afraid not to. The ambulance jolted into motion. The siren's wail filled the cabin, a long, rising cry that felt almost human. "Stay with me," Laura whispered, her voice trembling. "You've come too far to quit now." She glanced out the small window. Max's face was there, pressed against the glass of the back door, eyes fixed on her. His breath fogged the surface with every pant. The city lights flickered past in blurs. Laura's thoughts began to drift, not away, but backward. The sharp sting of the present bled into the ache of memory, a hospital room years ago. The smell of antiseptic, the sound of rain outside. A younger version of herself, sitting on a bed, clutching her stomach as a doctor spoke softly, words that didn't make sense until they did. "We're sorry, Detective Bennett. We couldn't save the baby." She had gone home that night to silence, to an empty nursery and a life that had quietly collapsed in on itself. The world had moved on, but a piece of her had stayed there, frozen in that sterile room. Now, as the ambulance rattled down the road, she looked at the tiny child in front of her and felt that same ache twist inside, the kind that never really healed, only hid. "Don't let this one go," she thought. "Please, not again." "Heart rate dropping," one of the paramedics shouted. Laura snapped her head up. The beeping on the monitor slowed, each tone dragging longer than the last. The medic's movements became frantic, checking the oxygen, adjusting the mask. "Pulse faint." The color drained from Laura's face. "No, no, no." The medic started chest compressions with 2 fingers, precise and fast. "Come on, sweetheart. Stay with us," he murmured, sweat running down his temple. Laura's throat went dry. The monitor's beeps became scattered, then flat. A single, unbroken tone filled the air. Max let out a low, mournful sound from behind the window, a sound Laura had only heard once before, years ago, when she'd sat alone on the floor of her apartment, with the ultrasound photo still in her hand. "Don't you dare," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Don't you dare go now. He found you for a reason. Time for your son." The medic kept working. Seconds stretched into lifetimes. Laura reached forward, pressing her hand gently over the baby's tiny foot under the blanket. It was cold, too cold. "Come on," she whispered again, her tears falling freely now. "Come on, little one. You're not leaving him like this. Not after what he did for you. Not after everything." The monitor stayed flat. Then, a flicker. The line jolted once, then again. A faint beep broke through the tone. The medic froze, eyes darting to the screen. "We've got rhythm!" The flat line turned to a weak pulse, uneven, fragile, but there. The sound filled the air again, slow but steady. "Oh my God!" Laura gasped, pressing her hand to her mouth. Her shoulders shook, a choked laugh spilling out between sobs. That's it, sweetheart." The paramedic sighed, almost laughing in relief. "She's fighting." Laura turned her face toward the window. Max was still there, eyes locked on her through the glass, the city's flashing lights reflected in his gaze. "She's alive," Laura whispered to him, smiling through tears. "You did it, Max." Outside, the rain began to fall, soft, cleansing, steady. It washed over the ambulance roof in rhythmic waves, as if the world itself was exhaling in relief. The siren still screamed, but now it sounded different, less desperate, more alive. Laura looked down at the baby again, her tiny chest rising and falling beneath the oxygen mask. She brushed a finger gently along the child's hand, feeling the faint twitch of movement. "Welcome back," she murmured. "You're safe now." The baby stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. For a brief moment, Laura felt everything: grief, relief, exhaustion, hope, all crashing together. and beneath it all, a quiet promise forming in her heart. I won't lose you. Not this time. The ambulance sped through the night, chasing the thin thread of life that refused to break. Inside, under the red pulse of emergency lights, Detective Laura Bennett sat beside the miracle her dog had unearthed from the dark, a child who should have been gone, but wasn't. And outside, running alongside the siren's echo, Max followed the light. The precinct was quieter than usual that morning, the kind of quiet that followed shock. Outside, the sky hung low and gray, still heavy with rain from the night before. The steady hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence, and the faint aroma of stale coffee lingered in the air. Detective Laura Bennett stood at the center of the operations board, her eyes scanning the growing storm of evidence pinned to it. Photos, documents, burnt ledgers, and maps marked with red lines. The once blank board had become a portrait of evil, a web connecting names and faces, routes and dates, the anatomy of a trafficking network that stretched farther than any of them had imagined. Morales dropped another stack of files onto the table. The address from the house matched one of the storage units we raided last month. Same handwriting, same supplier contacts. Laura nodded faintly, her jaw tight. So it's not just a safe house. It's part of a chain. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. Yeah, and we're only seeing the surface. On the wall behind them, a news station played softly on mute. A local anchor smiled from the screen as the caption read, K9 hero saves infant from human traffickers. A photo of Max flashed on the screen, his dark eyes steady, his badge gleaming under his collar. The headline had spread like wildfire across the city overnight. The dog who heard the cry. Carter, leaning on the back of a chair, smirked. Our boy's famous. Never thought I'd see Max on TV before any of us. Morales grinned weakly. He's already got fan mail at the front desk. Someone dropped off dog treats and a thank you card. But Laura didn't smile. Her gaze lingered on the board, specifically on one corner where photographs of missing children were pinned. 10 faces, 10 names, all still unaccounted for. Her stomach twisted. They're still out there, she said quietly. The room went still. The hum of the lights seemed louder. Carter's smirk faded. Laura. No, she said sharply. We can't call this a win. Not yet. Morales lowered his voice. You saved one life. That's something. Laura shook her head slowly. It's not enough. She turned away, pretending to review a file, but her reflection in the glass of the window betrayed her. The exhaustion etched in her eyes, the guilt sitting heavy on her shoulders. Every photo on that wall felt like a silent accusation. Every smile frozen in time asked the same question. Why not me? Behind her, Max lay on his blanket in the corner of the office. His front paws were bandaged, still raw from the night before. He rested his head on them, his gaze calm, steady, as if watching her was enough to keep her grounded. Someone had placed a new stainless steel bowl beside him, filled with water. A small hero tag dangled from his collar. News wants an interview, Carter said, breaking the silence. They're asking if we can release footage from the scene. They want to make him the face of the department. Laura didn't look up. He doesn't need the spotlight. Morales frowned. You okay, Bennett? She hesitated, then sighed, lowering her pen. I just keep thinking about what would have happened if we'd walked away. You didn't, Morales reminded her. Because of him. Laura's eyes softened. Yeah, because of him. She glanced at Max, who seemed to sense her gaze. His tail thumped softly against the floor. Once, twice, slow and deliberate. But even that comfort couldn't quiet the unease twisting inside her. She couldn't shake the image of the baby's tiny face, pale and still under the oxygen mask. She couldn't stop hearing the echo of that broken lullaby, a sound that had become her reminder that there was more buried beneath the silence. Later that evening, as the precinct lights dimmed and most of the team went home, Laura stayed behind. The rain had started again, tapping lightly against the tall windows. The board loomed before her, covered in clues and heartbreak. A mug of cold coffee sat forgotten by her elbow. Her laptop glowed faintly in the dark. On the screen, the case file for the baby they'd found now had a name. Jane Doe, approx. 3 months old. She scrolled through the evidence, fingerprints, fibers, scraps of receipts, but her mind wasn't on the paperwork. It was on the small hand that had clutched Max's fur. The door creaked open behind her. Max padded in slowly, his nails clicking softly against the tile. He walked straight to her, no hesitation, and sat at her feet. Laura smiled faintly, reaching down to brush her hand through his fur. Couldn't sleep either, huh? He pressed his head against her leg, a deep, comforting weight. She could feel his warmth seeping through the fabric of her pants, grounding her. "Everyone's calling you a hero," she said softly. "They're not wrong." Max blinked up at her, his expression patient, almost human. "But it's not over, Max. Not yet. We found one. But there are more." Her voice wavered, quiet but certain. "We can't stop until we find them all." She reached forward, gently cupping his muzzle in both hands. "You and me, okay? We're not done." Max exhaled slowly, eyes closing, and laid his head in her lap. "Time for 100 ones." His breath came in soft waves, steady and warm. Laura sat there in silence, her fingers tracing circles through his fur. The office around them was dark, except for the pale blue glow of the computer screen. The sound of rain outside was soft, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Her thoughts drifted again, back to the hospital, where the baby now lay recovering. Doctors had said she would make it, weak but alive. A miracle, they called it. But Laura didn't believe in miracles. Not really. She believed in instinct, in loyalty, in the unexplainable force that had made Max stop that day, had made him dig until his paws bled. He had felt something, a whisper of life buried in the dark, and refused to give up. And now, looking at him resting peacefully beside her, Laura realized that his silence was not emptiness. It was strength. It was trust. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't move, but his tail brushed lightly against her knee. Outside, thunder rolled low in the distance, fading into the sound of rain. Laura leaned back in her chair, eyes heavy but heart steady. The board on the wall loomed in front of her, all those missing faces, waiting. She tightened her grip on Max's collar gently. "We'll find them all," she said again, firmer this time, her voice breaking slightly. Max lifted his head just enough to look at her, then laid it back down on her lap with a quiet sigh. A silent agreement. The clock ticked past midnight. The rain fell harder, but in that dimly lit office under the hum of tired lights, a promise was made. Not in words, but in faith. A bond stronger than language, sealed in the quiet between them. 3 weeks later, the fog returned. It rolled down from the hills like a slow-moving tide, swallowing the trees, the road, and finally, the crooked outline of the house that had haunted Laura's dreams every night since the rescue. The call had come in at dawn. New intelligence suggesting the traffickers were back to recover what they'd left behind. Evidence, maybe. Or worse, more children. The drive up the mountain road was silent, except for the hum of the engine. Inside the SUV, no one spoke. Morales rode up front, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Carter sat in the back with Max, whose head rested between his knees, tail still and stiff. The air inside felt heavy, thick with memory. Laura's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Each turn brought them closer to the house, and to the ghosts that waited there. When it finally came into view, the sight stole her breath. The once quiet house stood beneath the gray sky like a scar reopened. The broken windows had been covered with new boards, and the crime scene tape fluttered weakly in the wind. The walls, streaked with rain and time, seemed to sag under the weight of secrets. "Same as before," Morales muttered, still standing. "Barely," Laura replied, cutting the engine. They stepped out into the cold. The grass was slick with dew, the air sharp enough to sting the lungs. Somewhere in the distance, a lone bird cried out, a sound so thin it barely carried. Max jumped down, landing softly beside Laura. His ears flicked forward immediately, nose twitching. "Back here again, huh, boy?" she whispered. He didn't react. His gaze was fixed on the house, his body tense. Carter frowned. "You think he remembers?" Laura glanced at him. "Dogs remember everything that matters." Morales checked his weapon. "Let's move. Same formation." The front door creaked open just as it had weeks ago. That same hollow sound that made the hair on the back of Laura's neck stand up. The air inside hit her like a wall, damp, musty, and faintly metallic. But underneath it lingered another scent, one she recognized instantly. Decay. The flashlight beams cut through the gloom, catching particles of dust that floated like ash. "It's colder," Carter murmured. Laura didn't answer. Her chest tightened. It wasn't just the air. It was memory. The image of the baby in her arms. The way Max had dug until his paws bled. The house was silent, but it felt awake now, as if remembering too. Max moved first. His steps were slow but certain, nose close to the ground, tail low. He sniffed the corners, the walls, pausing occasionally as if catching echoes that no one else could sense. "He's acting strange," Morales said quietly. Laura shook her head. "He's searching." They followed him through the hallway. Everything was as they'd left it. The broken furniture, the faded wallpaper, the faint outline of the crib upstairs, visible through the cracked ceiling. Then Max stopped. He pressed his nose against the base of the wall, sniffing hard, then turned sharply toward the living room. His claws clicked against the wood as he walked, his pace quickening. "Laura," Morales said, his tone cautious. She followed Max into the room where it had all begun, where they'd first heard the lullaby. The air was heavier here, dense with moisture. Her flashlight caught something small beneath the shattered remains of a table. She knelt. It was a baby's sock, pink, embroidered with a tiny heart. The fabric was stiff, weathered, but unmistakably real. Her chest ached. "They weren't done using this place," she whispered. Morales crouched beside her. "Maybe it's old, from before." "No," she said quietly. "It's not dusty enough." Carter kicked at the corner of the floorboard. "God, this is sick." They moved deeper into the room. The fog outside pressed against the boarded windows, dimming the light until it felt like evening again. Max's breathing quickened. He paced, then suddenly froze in front of the fireplace. He sniffed once, twice, then barked sharply. "Got something?" Morales asked. Laura hurried over. Max was pawing at the edge of the hearth. Dust and ash scattered under his claws. Laura knelt beside him and shone her flashlight into the gap where the brickwork had chipped away. Something glinted faintly. "Help me clear this," she said. They pried at the loosened stones until a small compartment revealed itself, shallow, hidden behind the crumbling wall. Inside lay a child's drawing, torn but recognizable. It showed a crude sketch of a house with stick figures, 2 adults, 3 children, and a dog. A smiling sun floated above them. Laura's throat closed. "They drew this here," Morales' voice cracked. "They were keeping kids in this room." Carter stepped back, shaking his head. "We need to burn this place down." But Laura wasn't listening. She was staring at Max. The dog had moved again, pacing the far wall. He stopped near the corner, sniffing the floor with growing urgency. Then, without warning, he began scratching at the boards, hard and fast. "Here we go again," Morales muttered, reaching for his crowbar. "No," Laura said, eyes narrowing. "He's not digging for scent this time. He's tracking movement." "Movement." "Air," she said. "There's a draft." Morales knelt, running his fingers along the baseboard. "You're right. There's space behind here." Carter looked uneasy. "What kind of space?" Laura's stomach turned. "Basement." They worked quickly, prying away the warped planks. The wood gave with a groan, and the smell hit them all at once. Thick, foul, unmistakable. The stench of decay. Morales gagged, covering his mouth. "Jesus Christ." Laura forced herself to look. A dark stairwell descended into shadow, narrow and steep. Max growled low, his fur bristling. He didn't want to go down, but he wouldn't leave the opening either. Laura steadied herself, swallowing hard. Flashlights on. They descended slowly, the air growing colder, wetter, heavier with each step. The walls were concrete, slick with condensation. At the bottom, the beam of Laura's light fell across the floor. And there it was. A teddy bear, half buried in dust, one button eye missing. It lay on its side, small arms outstretched, as if waiting for a hug that would never come. Morales stopped breathing for a moment. Carter turned away, muttering something under his breath that sounded like a prayer. Laura crouched, reaching for the bear. Her glove brushed its matted fur, damp and soft with time. She lifted it gently, turning it over in her hands. A name was stitched into the back in faded thread. Ellie. Her chest tightened until it hurt. "She was here," she whispered. "A little girl named Ellie." The silence that followed was unbearable. Even Max, steady, brave Max, whimpered softly. He stepped closer, lowering his head to sniff the bear, then sat beside Laura, his tail still, his eyes reflecting the light like twin shards of glass. Morales wiped at his face, his voice hoarse. "How can people do this?" No one answered. The house creaked above them, a long, mournful sound like a sigh. The flashlight beams wavered, catching on walls that seemed to close in around them. Laura held the teddy bear to her chest, closing her eyes for a brief moment. "We'll find them," she whispered, not just to herself, but to the ghosts still trapped in that place. When she opened her eyes, Max was staring at her, quiet and watchful. His gaze said everything she couldn't. A bond passed between them. Grief, fury, and a promise. A promise that none of those children would be forgotten. They climbed back up the stairs, leaving the basement to its shadows. But as Laura reached the top, she paused and looked back one last time. Down below, in the flicker of her flashlight, the teddy bear's stitched name caught the light. A tiny shimmer of memory in the dark. And for a heartbeat, she swore she heard it again. The soft, broken hum of a lullaby echoing faintly from the depths. The storm came in just before dawn. Rain slammed against the windshield in heavy, uneven sheets as the convoy of police vehicles cut through the city streets. flashing lights piercing the darkness like veins of blue fire. Laura sat in the front seat of the lead SUV, soaked in adrenaline and exhaustion. Her heart drummed against her ribs as Morales briefed the team over the radio. Confirmed location: abandoned warehouse by the docks. Multiple suspects on site. Trafficking leader expected to be there. Laura's fingers tightened around the radio. We go in quiet. We end this. Beside her, Max sat alert, his chest rising and falling with measured breaths. The bandages on his paws were gone now, replaced with faint scars, reminders of the night he'd found the baby. He looked older under the harsh glow of the flashing lights, but his eyes still burned with the same focused fire. You ready, partner? She whispered. He gave a low whine, tail thumping once against the floor. Morales' voice crackled in the headset. Team 2 in position. Laura exhaled slowly. All units, go. The SUV doors opened to the roar of rain. The team moved quickly, boots splashing through puddles, weapons drawn. The warehouse loomed ahead, massive, silent, its rusted panels streaked black by water. Thunder rolled overhead, shaking the air. They breached the side entrance in one swift motion, the door flying open, the beam of their flashlights cutting through the shadows. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of crates and debris, the stench of mildew mixed with something chemical and sharp. Clear left, Morales shouted. Right side clear, Carter echoed. Then, a sound. Footsteps. Running. Time harems. Movement. Laura turned sharply, catching a glimpse of a figure darting through the maze. Tall, hooded, fast. Max, go! The German shepherd lunged forward like lightning, paws pounding against the wet concrete. His bark tore through the storm as he pursued the suspect, weaving through the maze of boxes. Laura followed, her breath ragged. Stop! Police! The suspect didn't slow. He crashed through a side door, splintering it open, and bolted into the alley behind the warehouse. Rain poured harder now, turning the ground into slick mud. Laura chased after them, flashlight beam flickering wildly. The figure slipped once, regained footing, and turned, a flash of metal glinting in his hand. A knife. Laura froze for half a second, just long enough for fear to register. Then Max lunged between them. The suspect swung wildly. The knife sliced through the air and found its mark. A sharp cry split the night. Not human. Max! The word ripped from her throat as if torn from her lungs. Max collided with the suspect, knocking him down. The man's weapons skittered across the ground. They wrestled briefly before officers burst through the door behind Laura, shouting commands. Get down! Hands where we can see them! The suspect kicked free, scrambling backward. But Max was faster. Even bleeding, he lunged again, teeth snapping, pinning the man to the ground until Morales and Carter closed in to cuff him. The moment the struggle ended, Max staggered back. Laura dropped to her knees beside him, rain drenching her hair and uniform. No, no, no. Her hands pressed against his side. Warm blood slicked her gloves. Call a medic, Morales shouted behind her. Max's breathing came fast and shallow. His fur was soaked, the dark stains spreading across his flank. Lightning flashed overhead, throwing everything into stark white light. Stay with me, Laura whispered, her voice breaking. You hear me, hero? Stay with me. His eyes flicked up to her, steady, unwavering, even as his body trembled. He made a faint sound, half whine, half exhale. Don't you dare, she said, choking back a sob. Not after everything. You're not leaving me. Rain poured harder, drumming against the asphalt, washing his blood into thin crimson rivers. The warehouse lights blurred in the downpour. Morales appeared beside her, radio pressed to his ear. Ambulance en route. ETA 5 minutes. 5 minutes is too long, she snapped, cradling Max's head. His breathing hitched again. His paw shifted weakly, pressing against her leg, as if to reassure her. A gesture that shattered her completely. She cupped his muzzle, tears mixing with the rain. You saved me. Again. Thunder cracked above them. Carter returned from the alley, dragging the cuffed suspect toward the car. We got the leader, he said out of breath. It's over. Laura looked up, her face streaked with rain and grief. It's not over, not until he's safe. Morales put a hand on her shoulder. Laura, get me the keys, she barked, rising to her feet. Now! He hesitated only a second before tossing her the SUV keys. She caught them with shaking hands and turned to Max. Come on, buddy, I've got you. Time tassons. She lifted him, his weight heavy against her chest, his body limp but warm. Her arms trembled under the effort, but she refused to let go. She carried him through the rain, across the puddled ground, her breath ragged with sobs. The SUV door slammed open, and she laid him across the back seat, wrapping her jacket over his wound. His eyes fluttered open briefly, searching for her. I'm right here, she whispered, climbing in beside him. I'm not going anywhere. The engine roared to life. Tires splashed through water as the SUV tore down the road, sirens wailing ahead of them. Rain hammered the windshield, streaking the city lights into blurs. Laura kept one hand on the wheel, the other pressed firmly against Max's wound. Blood soaked through the fabric of her sleeve. Stay with me, Max, please, she murmured again and again, like a prayer. You don't get to quit on me now. He let out a faint sound. Low, trembling, but alive. Her throat tightened. That's it. Keep fighting. You're stronger than this. The radio crackled with updates. Suspects in custody. Leader confirmed captured. But Laura barely heard them. None of it mattered in that moment. All she saw was Max fading in and out under the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Every bump in the road drew a soft, pained grunt from him. She reached over, stroking his head gently. I know it hurts, buddy. But you're gonna be okay. You have to be. When the vet's emergency lights finally appeared in the distance, relief and terror hit her all at once. She slammed the SUV to a stop and threw open the door, shouting for help before she even reached the entrance. The staff came running, with a stretcher. Gunshot? One asked. Knife, Laura managed, her voice shaking. He saved my life. They lifted Max carefully, the team moving fast. Laura followed close behind as they rushed him through the doors and into the surgical bay. The smell of antiseptic hit her like a wall. Her boots squeaked on the tile. One of the vets turned to block her path, raising a hand. Detective, you need to wait outside. I'm not leaving him. Please, the vet said gently. We'll do everything we can. Laura stopped, her chest heaving, soaked hair plastered to her face. She looked past the vet's shoulder, just enough to see Max being lifted onto the table, the lights above blindingly white, his eyes still open but heavy. Stay with me, hero, she whispered, her voice trembling. Max turned his head slightly, eyes meeting hers one last time before the doors swung shut. The hallway fell silent except for the faint hum of machines. Laura stood there, drenched and shaking, her hands still covered in his blood. Outside, the rain kept falling, relentless, unending, washing the night clean, but not the ache it left behind. The steady rhythm of machines filled the room, a fragile, artificial heartbeat in the pale blue light. Max lay motionless on the table, fur matted with blood and rain, a breathing tube running from his muzzle. His chest rose in shallow waves. The monitors pulsed faintly, proof he was still fighting. Laura sat close, her hand over his paw, feeling the warmth fade beneath her fingers. The vet moved quietly, adjusting IVs, reading vitals. No one spoke. The silence carried all the weight words couldn't. She'd seen death before, in alleys, in crime scenes, but never like this. This was her partner, her best friend, the one soul who'd never left her behind. She brushed his fur gently. "Hey," she whispered, "you're supposed to be sleeping at home, not here." Her thumb traced small circles on his paw, the way she did after long patrols. "Remember our first mission?" she murmured, voice trembling. "You were barely a year old, barking at everything. Drove me crazy." She gave a broken laugh. "And still, you found that missing kid in an hour. I thought it was luck, but no. You just knew. You always knew who needed saving." Her tears blurred the room. Memories flooded back. Max racing through training fields, tail wagging. His first jump into her arms after certification. The night he took a bullet meant for her. Each moment stitched together the story of a bond that went deeper than words. "You've saved my life more times than I can count," she whispered. "You don't owe me another one." "Detective," the vet said softly, his blood pressures dropping. Laura's head snapped up. "No, he's still breathing." "Barely." His chest rose slower now, the monitor skipping beats. "Come on," she pleaded, leaning close. "Stay with me." Her forehead pressed against his. "Please, Max. You've come back from worse. Don't leave me now." "We're losing him," the vet said quietly. The beeping grew slower, until it stretched into one long, steady tone. "No." Her voice broke as she pressed her hands to his chest. "Come on, Max, please." The vet reached for the switch, but she stopped him. "Wait." She lowered her head, whispering against his fur. "You found life in a place full of death. You brought hope into the dark. You saved her, and you saved me." Tears soaked into his coat. "You found a life and gave yours." The monitor went silent. The hum of the machines faded. In the doorway, Morales stood with his hat in hand, his face pale. No one moved. Laura stayed where she was, her hand still over his paw. Outside, thunder rolled softly, distant, mourning. After a long silence, she whispered, "Rest now, hero. You did enough." Lightning flashed through the window. For an instant, he looked only asleep. Then the light faded, and the only sound left was rain against the glass. The world moved on, but for Laura, time didn't. 3 weeks had passed since that night in the rain, since the hospital lights dimmed and the long, unbroken beep carved its scar into her heart. The city had celebrated a hero, but she hadn't gone. She couldn't. The papers called him the dog who heard the unheard. Awards were given, letters poured in, drawings of Max with angel wings filled her mailbox. But no words could fill the silence that followed her home. On a soft spring morning, Laura walked through the park with a bouquet of lilies. The world had color again, faint, returning. She followed the path to the memorial garden by the lake, where a new bench gleamed beneath an oak tree. Max, K9, Unit 27. He heard what no one else could. She knelt, placing the flowers at its base. "You'd hate all this attention," she murmured, smiling through tears. "But you earned it, partner." For a while she just sat, feeling the echo of his presence, that calm, that courage, the way he'd rest his head on her lap after every mission. "You saved a life that night," she whispered, "and somehow, you saved mine too." Then she heard laughter, light, pure. A toddler wobbled across the grass, a dandelion clutched in her hand. Laura froze. The child, the baby Max had fought to save, now healthy, rosy, alive. Her adoptive parents followed, smiling as she toddled toward the bench. The little girl stopped, resting her tiny hand on the plaque. Her fingers traced the words. He heard what no one else could. Then she smiled. Not the fleeting smile of a child, but something deeper, almost knowing. Laura's breath trembled. For a moment she believed Max was there, unseen but near. The girl giggled and waved at the empty air beside the bench before turning back to her parents. When they passed, the mother smiled. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Laura nodded. "It is." She turned back to the plaque, her tears soft but sure. "You saw that, didn't you?" she whispered. "She knows. Somehow, she knows." A breeze stirred the branches, and a leaf drifted down beside the lilies. Laura smiled. "Still watching, huh? Always guarding." The sunlight grew warmer, and for a heartbeat she heard it. The faint jingle of a collar, the soft thump of a tail, a bark carried by the wind. It was enough. "Good boy," she whispered. As the family disappeared down the sunlit path, petals lifted into the air, scattering across the grass. The breeze brushed her cheek, gentle, familiar. And for the first time since that night, Laura felt peace. She looked to the sky. "Rest easy, hero," she said. "Your story lives in her now." A photograph of Max sat by the flowers, his eyes bright in the morning sun. And as the wind moved through the trees, one last echo lingered. A bark, distant and soft, carried on the light. In the end, stories like Max's remind us that love doesn't always need words. Sometimes it looks like a paw on your knee, a steady gaze, or the silent loyalty of a heart that simply knows. German shepherds have that rare gift, a kind of courage that's quiet, selfless, and deeply human in its devotion. They don't just guard us. They teach us what it means to care without condition. If this story touched something in you, maybe it's because you've felt that same bond, the way a dog seems to understand you when no one else does. If you'd like to learn more about deepening that connection, I've left a small resource you can explore at your own pace. Nothing fancy, just something that might bring you and your dog a little closer. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for remembering that every act of kindness, even one from a four-legged hero, keeps the world a gentler place. Give your dog an extra hug tonight. He deserves it.